Chapter 7, Personal Experience, Testimony, and Expert Authority. Now, last chapter we talked about touchstones. Touchstones are those things that we can look at and rely on and use as a reliable source of truth. And Herrick considers several different touchstones in this chapter, beginning with our own personal experience. And he clarifies when he talks about our personal experience, he doesn't just mean one single sense experience. So for last chapter, he uses the example of I see something red in my visual field. That would be a single isolated sense experience. Or I'm experiencing the flavor of the lemon. When he talks about our personal experience as a touchstone, it could be very broad. For example, after high school, I joined the Air Force. I have very vivid memories from basic training or boot camp. Getting off that bus and being initially yelled at by the drill instructors, standing at attention in the freezing cold in San Antonio, Texas in January and singing the Air Force song at 6 o'clock in the morning, graduation in my dress blue uniform and being so proud and glad to be out of that mess. All those together would be part of my personal experience. College, going to Pellissippi, transferring to UT, being an undergrad and then a graduate school, studying the various libraries, going to the sporting events, taking classes, and then teaching classes in the different buildings. That's all part of my experience. Stand-up comedy. I was a stand-up comedian briefly whenever I was in graduate school, going from a guy who just showed up at open mic night, developing his routine, being hired to be the actual host on the weekends. The thrill of the announcer saying, "Everybody give it up for Professor Matt." That was my stage name back in the day. Boxing, decided to box before my 40th birthday as my midlife crisis adventure. All sorts of cool memories from that. How I was afraid before my first fight. I was afraid that morning. I was afraid on the team van to the venue. I was afraid during the weigh-in. I was afraid during the doctor's check. I was afraid during my warm-ups. I was afraid when they put my gloves on me. I was afraid when they called my name to the ring. But as I stepped up each step to the ring, that fear dissipated and it was replaced. And whenever I slipped through the ropes for my first fight, every bit of that fear was gone. It was replaced with anger at that guy across from me who wanted to punch me in the face. And skydiving, nephew a couple of years ago for his high school graduation gift wanted to go skydiving. So I took him and did a tandem skydive. Man, what an experience. Being in that teeny tiny plane, however many thousand feet in the air, seeing the earth beneath me, taking that leap out of that plane, having the earth rush toward me, knowing that if something went wrong, there's certain death, but doing it anyway and accepting that, so liberating. All that is a part of my background experience. I'm sure you have lots of those as well. Now, of course, often our experience is distorted by our cognitive biases and also things in the physical world. So, of course, we have confirmation bias, seeing the things we want to see, giving more weight to arguments and reasons that we prefer, and dismissing the things that we don't prefer. Egocentrism, wish fulfillment, which has, of course, no impact on the actual veracity of a claim. And also physical conditions. It could be under the influence of something, be very tired. It could be an optical illusion. All those things can impact our experience. Now, of course, our experiences, when they're in the past, they're called memories. And hopefully these memories are somewhat reliable. However, as we know, they can present the past as we want to remember it. It can fill in gaps with things that never actually happened. It can construct complete stories. This is why attorneys in a court of law will cross-examine witnesses quite vigorously and make darn sure that the person really remembers the thing that they claim to remember. Ask them about how far away they were, how dark it was, specific details about the person that they claim to have seen, etc. And also, our memories in some cases can overemphasize the negatives. Almost all humans experience this, where sometimes our memories will just play this highlight reel of our biggest failures and our biggest fears, our biggest screw ups, and people have done us wrong. Things have went wrong. That's not an accurate reflection of our past, but there must be some sort of a benefit to seeing those terrible things, or at least there was a benefit at some time to help us to avoid other mistakes in the future, I suppose. But that's something we have to work through and let go of those terrible highlight reels of negativity, which aren't accurate reflections of our actual lives. But we have to recognize, first of all, and then guard against our cognitive biases. And when our memory claims seem to conflict with other things we know, as Herrick says, they need to be tested against independent evidence before being accepted as veritical, which just means truthful. Memories can be tested by checking them against witnesses who were present, against physical records, video evidence or whatever, and also against other memories of your own. Does this conflict with your background memories and knowledge? Is there a better explanation for this apparent conflicting memory? The touchstone of background information. This would include all sorts of things that perhaps we have not tested or experienced ourselves, but we have good reason to trust. For example, Herrick uses the example of ocean water is salty. Maybe you've never been to the ocean, but you just trust that it's the case. The seawater is indeed salty because you've heard that enough. There's no reason to believe there's a grand conspiracy to make people think that ocean water is salty when it's actually not. And if you've ever been to the ocean and you've had a wave splash you in the face, you know darn well that ocean water is salty. Those emails that you get that say, hey, want this part-time job and you can work 2 hours a week and we'll send you $500 cash. It's all online. We know that's a scam. That's just part of our background knowledge. That traffic is terrible around UT or probably any college campus during a big game day. Before kickoff, after the game ends, don't go anywhere near there. If you do, make sure you're taking back roads and be very prepared to have delays. And also, as a professor, you learn with experience that real undergrad student essays have a certain style and sophistication, and so do AI generated essays. And so when you read an essay, you get a feel for, was this really written by a person with their organic human brain, or was this a bot? Now, you can use the alunkus, a term that Herrick brought up very early in the book, which Socrates would use to show that something a person was arguing was actually in conflict with something else that they believed. And so when you saw that incompatibility between these two claims, if the one were fully trusted, then the one that's being tested can be discarded or at least challenged. The same thing happens here. Somebody tells you something that's very contrary to your background information. That gives you reason not to just immediately accept it. However, as Herrick recommends, and I also endorse, we need to always be open to changing or adjusting, modifying our background information. Because of course, for some time, people believed that the earth was the center of the universe. That was just background knowledge. For a time, people thought that the universe was static. Now scientists tell us that it's expanding. We also used to believe, or humans used to believe in general, that the continents were stagnant, but instead we know there's continental drift now. And so whatever your background information, you need to be open to changing it with good enough reason to do so. You wouldn't just want to immediately switch, but you do want to be open in principle to changing it, given good enough reason. Testimony as a touchstone. So Herrick offers us Thomas Reid's principle of gullibility. His principle of testimony. Reid argued that in ordinary situations, people have a natural propensity to speak truth and that lying is doing evident violence to our nature. That's probably a good way to live. So I made fun of the principle of testimony, calling it the principle of gullibility. I wouldn't want to be a cynic and think that everybody out there is intending to mislead me. So we do have a pragmatic reason to not be cynical and to take claims at face value in most cases. And by the way, at face value just means based on what's actually been stated. It just means taken for granted or taken as true. I didn't know that when I was an undergrad. I remember having to ask a professor, what does face value mean? For some reason, I would come across that phrase. But Thomas Reid's principle of testimony is that in most cases, you should trust unless given good reason to not trust. And so, for example, beware, ask yourself, does this person have a record of lying or being wrong? Are they a known deceiver? Do they twist the truth? Do they bend the truth? Are they known for doing that? Or are they just known for saying things that are incorrect? Have they been proven wrong time and again? It's probably a reason not to trust what they're saying. Does the person have a motive to be less truthful? Do they have something to gain or to lose based on what you believe or what others believe? Do people accept this claim or reject this claim? Now, if they do have a motive, that doesn't necessarily mean what they're saying is incorrect. It just means you can't take it at face value. You need to challenge it somewhat. Do they have biases that might distort their perception? Do you know that it's the case that they have a bias for a particular direction? Well, maybe they're falling very much victim to those cognitive biases and all of those issues that we all suffer. Maybe they've never taken a critical thinking class. They don't guard against that. And so you should not just accept what they've said if you understand that they do have those biases. Does their testimony conflict with your background information or with more reliable sources? If it does, that doesn't mean it's necessarily wrong. It just gives you a reason to slow down, request additional evidence, and not just immediately swallow it. And also, is the best interpretation that what they're saying is actually the case, or is the best interpretation that they are either lying or they are deluded. There's a special kind of testimony called expert testimony, which can be extra valuable in some cases. An expert becomes an expert whenever they have education and training in a relevant field, credible education and training. If they have professional accomplishments in that field, if they've published, they've had some different breakthroughs, especially if they have a strong reputation among their peers, and also if they have a history of reliable judgment. So if they're an outcast and they went to some ridiculous institution that really didn't have anything to do with where they claim to have expertise, then maybe you want, and also what they're saying is conflicting with the rest of their other experts. It would be a reason to put too much faith in what they're saying. But even if they are an expert, according to those selected criteria, you also want to beware. Are they an interested party? Are they on the payroll of a particular institution or entity that could encourage them to slant their judgment? Do they have a personal stake in it? They have something to gain, to lose. And Herrick says, quote, we have reason to suspect bias or suspect bias if we have evidence the person is motivated by something other than the pure pursuit of objective truth. There are a few people out there that are motivated by the pure pursuit of objective truth, but in most cases, that is us. And so all the different sources that we receive information from, the vast majority have something to gain or to lose. And so we have to be very discerning as to what we accept and as to what we put through additional scrutiny. And this would be true even of news sources. There's an old book called How to Watch TV News by Neil Postman. And I read it back in my 20s, and the cover looked like the example there with the television, with the viewer with the dollar signs on. I guess that's maybe the presenter with a dollar sign. Some dude sitting in the chair looking at it. More recent versions look like the one with all the how to watch TV news boxes. And so if you look this up, it could look like either of those. But what Postman argues in How to Watch TV News is that, look, news entities are businesses, and what they're selling is viewership. So you may be thinking they're selling objective news. What they're selling is advertising, and advertising rates are determined by viewership. And you can increase your viewership in a number of ways. One is to simply entertain your audience. And so he makes the argument that if it's a news channel on cable news, you're competing for eyeballs, not only with the other news channels, but also with Comedy Central, also with ESPN, also with HBO. And if your content isn't entertaining enough, if you don't hold their attention well enough, they're going to flip and look at something else because it's very, very easy to do that. And so that's one reason the television news in many cases lacks context, and it's very superficial. It doesn't really dive into the history of the situation, provide that much quality info, background information. It's because they've got to be fast and they've got to be entertaining to compete with all those other sources. But something else that Postman talks about is the fact that you can gain and retain a viewership when they're afraid. You can gain and retain viewership when they're angry, because angry people will keep coming back to see if they should still be angry. And afraid people will definitely keep coming back to see if they should still be afraid. Now, of course, this is true of all news outlets. This wouldn't just be television news. This would be true of newspapers and other news sources. And oh my goodness, it would be true of social media sources. If you're looking at stuff that's on Facebook or Twitter or Instagram or wherever, almost all those sources are going to have the motive to entertain, to anger, and to scare their viewers, because that's going to have them come back. And then they can charge more for their advertising, the more engagement they get. And the social media algorithms, of course, promote the most, the content with the most engagement. And the content that gets the most engagement, the most likes, or the most whatevers, is usually going to be, or often be, that content which is controversial, makes people afraid, makes people angry. Sometimes it can be the stuff that's just funny, but in many cases, it's going to be the stuff that inflames. And if it's inflaming, it's making you angry or making you afraid, it's probably slanted in one direction or the other, and it's not going to be too motivated by offering the objective truth for you to absorb and do with what you will. So beware anytime you're viewing any sort of news source. Realize the motives behind these sources. Seek out sources that you believe that you can trust, even if it's a news source that panders to your existing biases, if it's one that tells you things that you like to hear, if you become addicted to being angry or being afraid, realize what's happening, realize how you're being manipulated, and try to break that habit. I've mentioned before how you can sample various sources and then you can figure out what they're trying to push and then hopefully cobble together some semblance of the truth from all that. Now, there's another issue called fallacious appeal to authority, and this is whenever you cite an expert on matters outside of the realm of expertise. In this case, you'd be overextending the epistemic value of the testimony into an unrelated area. And you'll see this quite a bit. One good example would be Matt Damon advocating for cryptocurrency. He's a paid spokesperson. He has that vested interest. He's being paid quite handsomely to promote that, but he's not a independent investment expert. He's a paid spokesperson, and he is not an expert in cryptocurrency or on economics in general. As far as I know, he's just a handsome man and a darn fine actor. So there's several issues with Matt Damon and pushing cryptocurrency. Uh, but one of those is that he's not an expert in personal investment, as far as I know. But here's some other examples. So my philosophy professor says lifespan treadmills are the best. I happen to be standing on a lifespan brand treadmill right now. It's an underdesk treadmill on my standing desk, and I've had it for 7 years, and it's fantastic. In fact, I'll turn it on. It takes just a second to kick in. What this treadmill allows me to do is to work on my computer, to type and click and read and do my work, and at the same time continue to engage my body, to allow me to engage my posture muscles, my legs, to elevate my heart rate just a little bit. It's a lot better than just sedentarily sitting at a desk. And it's performed almost flawlessly for those 7 years. I also bought a warranty on it. I had to have the warranty guys come out a couple of times when I first got it for making weird noises and such, but that's been quite some time. Now, you have my personal testimony as a consumer of Lifespan brand treadmills. I can't say with any confidence that they're the best. It's darn good, at least the one I have is good after a few warranty issues. But you would want to go to Consumer Reports, and you would want to go to the Consumer Reports experts in fitness equipment and get their expert judgment because one, they're experts, and two, they wouldn't have a vested interest because Consumer Reports are funded by individual subscriptions and not advertisements, and they don't receive funds from the companies for the products that they evaluate. Here's another one. My doctor or my neighbor, the attorney, says that Tom Hanks eats babies. That one's actually credible. Tom Hanks does eat babies, so just go ahead and accept that. But the last one, I'm just kidding. If your attorney, neighbor, the attorney is talking about something that's within the realm of their legal expertise, and there are subspecialties within the law, then you would want to give some weight to what they've said. But if they've said something about Tom Hanks eating babies, this probably, I would hope, conflicts with your background knowledge, but also even the most intelligent people fall prey to ridiculous conspiracy theories sometimes, just because they're educated more than you are, just because they have money, just because they're respected in one field, doesn't mean they're an expert in all areas. So don't necessarily swallow that. And similarly, my doctor says human-caused climate change is definitely real. Human-caused climate change may be real, but we wouldn't want to believe that just based on the fact that our doctor said it. The medical doctors are very intelligent people, but they're essentially mechanics for the human body. They have a lot of training. They have to be of a certain intelligence in order to get through medical school and maintain medical liability insurance and to continue to practice and hold their license and such. That doesn't mean they're a climatologist. So you want to do your own research about human-caused climate change and don't just believe that it's real or not real based on what someone outside of their area of expertise might say. 4 bonus tips. Number one, challenge sloppy reasoning, even from experts. Critical thinking is very liberating and empowering in that way. We don't have to accept terrible arguments. You learn how to reason better. You see that a person is committing a reasoning fallacy or a reasoning flaw. Even if they're an expert, you say, well, you're not considering this, or what about that? Number two, when experts disagree, reflect on their motives and also the history. They have a history of saying things that are wrong, or they have a history of lying, one side or the other. Also, seek and use truth-conducive sources, truth-oriented sources. There are some out there. I'll let you look for them on your own. I don't want to privilege one or the other, but think about it. Think hard about it and seek those out, see what you can find. And also admit when you don't know. So if there's an area where you're not really an expert in it, you have not really done your research, you can pretend that you know what you're talking about. But that's just going to add to all of our difficulty in figuring this thing called life out. So when you don't know, be humble and just say, well, I'm not sure. All right, that's chapter 7. Next chapter is on one of my very, very favorite topics, logical fallacies. And learning the logical fallacies really turned me on to philosophy when I studied them as an undergrad. Hope that you enjoyed the chapter as well.